Awesome. So I think the first topic that I'd love to dive into is how do you think about designing search experiences and just all these applications that search is just the core feature of them?
Yeah, that's a great question. For me, a lot of the time, there's so many different ways of getting at this problem. And one of the things that keeps me in search is just the fact that like search constantly changes. It's never a dull moment in the search space. Um, when I think about a search application, like there are so many types of search applications now. But to talk about maybe your classic, you have a search bar on an e-commerce site situation. The kinds of things that come up right away are first is just trying to figure out what kinds of things people search for. Sometimes people jump right away to building ranking backends, but often one of the most important things to look at is like, well, what kinds of things do people search for? Are they searching for specific types of products, like the actual names of like shoe versus dress? What kind of modifiers are they putting on that? Are they adding color? Are they adding material? Are they changing it in some way? And there will be general patterns. And often, like, the first thing I will look at is like, what does the historical queries look like? And what kinds, how can we break that up into a way that's a bit more almost like a structured search experience? And then that can help inform things like, oh, are we going to figure out how to do some kind of vector ranking behind the scenes, or a more lexical approach with things like BM25, or combine those in some ways to sort of get at those use cases people tend to search for.
Yeah, it's interesting. A decade ago when I was giving talks at conferences, I had this slide that showed a search bar and basically said, "This is the universal user interface for interacting with data." This
Mm-hmm.
was back before ChatGPT and generative AI models, in terms of talking with them. But the notion that when somebody comes to any large scale website or data application, they're entering some kind of a query. Might be SQL, might be natural language, might be just keywords, and then that leads you into some user experience to be able to view the results. And I, again, going back 15 plus years now, was really inspired by Netflix way back when. Some talks they gave about how they think about their search experience, and how at the time their entire view was one giant set of recommendations within recommendations. Meaning,
Mm-hmm.
when you come to Netflix, you might type something in, but then you see categories that are all recommendations for you. And within those categories, you see results that are all recommendations for you. And even though there's kind of some structure to the UI, what's really driving what you see is the data and what you know about the user and what you sort of know about the, in that case, movies. But in a more general sense, when we think about search, I am. It's really interesting to me if you think of an e-commerce case where somebody comes to a website and they type in something. They might type in a UPC or product ID, in which case you basically know exactly what they want and you can hone in directly to it. But they might just type a category, like if it's a home improvement store, they might type in grill, or outdoor, whatever. Say it was grill, and you usually will hit a landing page and it's describing that category. And it's been the case for a long time that we've had these different experiences depending upon the type of query. But we're now entering into the world where, based upon whatever query comes in, you can actually on the fly, in theory, construct user experiences directly around the results and the data and the query specificity and the popularity of the results and those kinds of things. And so I'm really, we're not quite there yet, but I'm really kind of envisioning a future where the results could look a little bit more kind of minority reportish, right? It's like I'm looking into something, and just as I'm going through the data, I get different visualizations and ways of looking at the data. That's very different from the rigid structures we've had in the past, but there's no reason we couldn't have that. And by all means, it will make the user experience much more interactive and engaging, and allow people to dig into the data. So we're not there yet, but I'm really excited to see what some of these more fluid, evolving user interfaces are. Where we'll go with that.
Yeah, there's just so many interesting nuggets in that. I think like digging into the search logs, the idea of having categories and like how facets, how integrated that is in our search experiences.
Hmm.
But it's something listening to. I recently listened to Doug's podcast on Hugo Bound Anderson's podcast, and I really liked this idea of like levels of integration of AI and search, and kind of thinking about that and how it shapes the search experience. So
Mm.
kind of like how we have like generative search, where you don't just get 10 blue links, you also get the paragraph level explanation. Maybe you have like a rationale with each search result of why they're relevant. Maybe it splits the view into like, three side panels and says like, here's the different topics of the clusters of your results. And just, I guess maybe one other thing I wanted to mention with this is there's an interesting paper from Google called Generative UIs, where they're saying that instead of having the LLM just give you the text, it produces HTML, JavaScript, CSS. And I mean, you can go look through these. They're pretty interesting. You can say like, hey, I'm planning a Thanksgiving dinner for 11 people. And it will, instead of
Mhm.
just giving you a wall of text about Thanksgiving, it'll give you like this
Mm.
dynamic application to say like, oh, I have 10 people, and it'll just like how much cups of gravy you need and how much cranberry sauce. And so it's like producing this like dynamic experience. And I can imagine like taking our search results and producing these on the fly. I think it's really an interesting idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think
Oh, go ahead, Doug.
I was going to say, yeah, the levels of integration is interesting because you can get a lot of value just from a lot of low hanging fruit of we talked a bit about sort of query understanding. That's something where LLMs are, it's just a very low hanging fruit, very cheap LLMs taking apart a query into how it should be searched. Um, People do things like query to SQL even, where they will turn some attributes into some SQL-y kinds of things, or some not even SQL, but some underlying query DSL. Um, and then there are things like, yeah, that you can go really deep into agents where you give agents search tools, and then agents are deciding how they're going to search. You can actually give an agent really simple, like BM25 search tools, and it can do a good enough job at building a kind of semantic-y kind of search, just knowing what kinds of queries to expand, and sort of hunting around of like, oh, this user wanted this. Well, then I should try to search this index for these specific things, or try different strategies of getting at the index and then aggregate those back. And then now, what's even kind of getting at the HTML example, I think that's really interesting. That's emerging. I think people are becoming more aware of it in the last month or so. Is this idea of recursive language models, which is like a language model that knows it runs in a Python REPL, and the context is a part of the Python variable. And in some ways, that becomes a search problem if also that variable, so to speak, that it's can search over is also just the corpus, right? So there are degrees of this, and once you get to agents, not even just using tools, but like generating code to manipulate data, like things get really advanced, and nobody really knows where all this ends.